The Haunted House of Sallie. Vengeful spirit. There are things that happen in life that defy any logical explanation. You may be skeptical. You may laugh at these stories and even convince yourself that ghosts don't exist. But when events start piling up, when each night becomes longer than the last, when the silence of the house carries a suffocating weight, that's when doubt creeps in. That's exactly what happened to me. I was never the type to believe in hauntings. I always thought they were just legends created to scare children or fuel late-night conversations. But the house I lived in for a short time, and will never forget, taught me that there are things in this world that cannot be ignored. What happened there wasn't a figment of my imagination. It wasn't a bad dream, a delusion, or a bout of paranoia. It really happened. And if you think it can't happen to you, think again. Sallie's house carries an ancient history, shrouded in mystery, pain, and something much darker. Something that survives time. Something that doesn't want to be forgotten. When I first stepped inside, I had no idea what awaited me. But I soon discovered that there are places that simply shouldn't be inhabited. Places where the walls whisper, the dark corners hide invisible eyes, and the night, well, the night never truly ends. The first glimpse of the house when I first saw the house, it seemed perfectly ordinary. An old Victorian-style building. Its details worn by time, surrounded by a low fence and an overgrown garden. It was the kind of house you'd pass on the street, without giving it much thought, except for the fact that something about it felt off. I can't quite explain what it was. Maybe it was the way the windows seemed darker than they should be, or the absolute silence around it, as if even the birds avoided singing there. But I ignored that strange feeling. I didn't believe in such things. And that's how I took my first step toward the mistake that would change my life. The move was quick. I needed a cheap place to live, and the house seemed perfect. The price was well below market value, and the owner seemed eager to close the deal. "Just don't be scared if you hear things at night," he said with a half smile, as if he were joking. I laughed, not realizing that warning was more serious than I could ever imagine. On moving day, the smell of old wood and mold enveloped me as soon as I walked through the door. The floor creaked with every step, and the air felt heavier inside the house than outside. But all of that was normal, right? At least, that's what I want to believe. The first signs on the first night, I went to bed exhausted, with no energy to pay attention to the small details that should have already alerted me. Like the door I was sure I had closed but found slightly ajar. Like the faint footsteps echoing upstairs, even though I was alone. Like the strange feeling of being watched in the dark. In the first few days, I tried to ignore the signs. There's always a logical explanation for things, right? The house was old, with creaks with temperature changes, and my mind, used to the noise of the city, was simply adjusting to the new silence. But the more I tried to convince myself of that, the harder it became to explain the occurrences. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. The lights flickered for no reason. And, worst of all, that strange feeling of being watched never went away. The presence reveals itself on the third night. I woke up to a noise coming from the hallway. It was a faint, dragging sound, as if something was being pushed across the floor. My eyes tried to adjust to the darkness, but all I could see was the bedroom door slowly opening. My heart raced. My brain struggled to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly. But then I heard it. A breath. Faint, short, almost childlike. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl, because you know it shouldn't be there. The next night was worse. The silence in the house became oppressive, as if something was waiting, just watching me. The creaking of the floor became more frequent, always late at night, always near my door. A strange smell began to permeate the air, something between burnt and rotten, as if something was decaying inside the walls. But what really made me realize I wasn't just dealing with my imagination was when I clearly heard a laugh. A child's laugh, muffled, coming from the room next door. I was alone. Sallie and the hidden truth after that night. I started researching the house. I spent hours online, digging through old archives, newspapers, anything that could help me understand the history of that place. That's when I found the name, Sallie. According to the stories, Sallie was a girl who lived in that house decades ago. Some versions of the story said she died from a high fever without receiving help in time. Others claimed her death was much darker, that she was a victim of abuse and died a terrible death. But there was one detail that repeated in all the accounts. After her death, the house was never the same. I didn't know what to think. Until then, I believed I was dealing with just an evil presence. But if Sallie was trying to warn me, then maybe there was something deeper behind it. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Was it really a scared girl trapped between worlds, or something much worse pretending to be a child? I needed to find out before it was too late. The final warning, I decided to try direct communication. I grabbed a notebook and wrote, "What do you want?" I waited. The silence was crushing. Then, the air turned cold, and the answer appeared on the paper, written in a shaky, childlike handwriting. "Run." My entire body shivered. If Sallie herself was telling me to run, what else could be in that house? What happened next was enough to convince me to never doubt what we don't understand. But that is another story. Since then, I've avoided talking about what happened in that house. But I know that somewhere Sallie is still there. And that thing is too. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run away. But a part of me already knows the answer. Because even now, when silence fills my room and the night grows heavy, I feel a familiar chill run up my spine. As if someone is standing in the dark, watching me. Echoes of the past days that follow were a blur of insomnia and paranoia. I could barely sleep, and when I did, nightmares dragged me back to the house. Always the same dream. I was standing in the dark hallway, hearing the sound of soft footsteps behind me. The child's laugh echoed through the void, and a voice whispered something incomprehensible in my ear. But every night, before I could understand the words, I woke up with a racing heart and my body drenched in cold sweat. But it wasn't just dreams. I could feel it. Sallie was still there. No matter how much I tried to move on, something of her remained with me. And it wasn't just her. The air in my new house always felt heavier than it should. The corners of the room seemed to darken faster when night fell. Small noises emerged in the silence. A creak in the wooden floor, a faint sigh out of nowhere. I tried to convince myself it was just the trauma of the previous experience, that my mind was playing tricks. But then, something happened. Something that made me realize I never really left that house. It all started with the mirrors. The presence continues the first time. It was just a strange reflection. I was brushing my teeth, trying to ignore the weight I felt in the air, when something flashed in the corner of my eye. A quick shadow. When I turned to look directly into the mirror, there was nothing, but the feeling lingered. The next night, I saw it again. But this time, it wasn't just a blur. It was a silhouette, small, standing behind me. My body froze. The air turned icy, and I felt a shiver run up my spine, leaving me breathless. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I knew it wouldn't help. I was being watched. I closed my eyes for a second, gathered my courage, and looked again. The silhouette was gone, but there was something new. On the fogged-up mirror, a phrase slowly appeared, as if invisible fingers had traced the surface. "He's still here." Fear gripped me like never before. My heart raced, and my body refused to move. I forced myself to blink a few times, hoping the words would disappear like a trick of my mind. But they remained like a scar on the glass. I wasn't alone. Calls in the night, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to believe it was just my mind playing tricks, that my imagination was projecting things. But then the phone call started, always at the same time, 3:03 a.m. The phone would ring once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. The number was unknown. But on the 4th night, I gave in. When I answered, I heard nothing at first, just muffled silence, as if the call was connected but no one had spoken yet. Then, a faint static emerged on the line, and soon after, a child's voice whispered, "Why did you leave?" My blood ran cold. The phone slipped from my hand and fell to the floor, but the call was still active. The static continued. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, as if trying to warn me of something worse. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and held it to my ear again, and then I heard it. It wasn't the child's voice anymore. It was something deeper, more guttural, something that shouldn't exist. You never left here." I hung up immediately, as if that could protect me from something I knew was already inside my house. And that's when my bedroom door opened on its own. The nightmare begins again from that night on. Terror took hold. The lights flickered at random moments. The temperature dropped drastically in certain rooms. Objects moved on their own, sometimes subtly, other times violently. But the worst was the presence. I could feel it getting closer. One night, I woke up with a feeling that something was wrong. My eyes opened slowly, and in the corner of the room, where the darkness was thickest, I saw a figure standing still. It was small, silent, facing away from me. I could barely breathe. The figure turned its head slowly, and even in the dim light, I saw it. The dark, hollow eyes, like voids and nothingness. The pale, lifeless face. The mouth slightly open, as if about to say something. But when it finally opened its mouth, the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a scream, a distorted, agonizing scream, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. My body moved before my mind could react. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, feeling the air behind me grow denser, as if something was closing in fast. When I crossed the door and slammed it shut, I heard a thud on the other side. Something tried to follow me. The only thing I could do was hold the doorknob with all my strength, locking the room behind me. My chest heaved uncontrollably, trying to pull air into my lungs. Silence fell heavily in the hallway, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then, from the other side of the door, I heard a faint whisper. "Do you think you can escape?" The door shook violently, and I knew it was only just beginning. The buried truth the next day, I made a decision. I needed to find out more. What was that thing? Why was it following me? What was Sallie trying to warn me about? I went back to my research, but this time I dug deeper. I found old archives, forgotten newspaper articles, and then I saw something that made my heart stop. Sallie's house wasn't just haunted. It was a trap. There were reports of people who tried to leave and never made it. Some simply disappeared without a trace. Others were found, but they weren't alive. Sallie's story wasn't just about a scared girl trapped between worlds. There was something more. Something that used her image to lure victims. Something that fed on fear. And I had fallen right into the trap. But I knew one thing now. Sallie didn't want to hurt me. She wanted to save me. But whatever was behind her wanted to destroy me. The final warning, I know I can't keep running. I know that at any moment, it can find a way to pull me back. And I know that when it does, I won't get a second chance. If you ever hear whispers in the middle of the night, if you notice doors opening on their own, if you smell something strange and rotten in the air, don't ignore it. Don't try to understand. And never, ever look back, because maybe it's already watching you.